Hi, I'm Dr. David Day of Samurai Digital Security, and this is 404 Cybersecurity Not Found, tearing cybersecurity a new arse since 2015.
Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode. We're joined today by Dr. David Day, and we have some stories from the trenches for you today. So Dave's worked in cybersecurity for more than 20 years, and Dave, as a personal note, I could listen to you talking about this stuff all day long, so I'm excited to hear you talk about it. So firstly, obviously, we do a lot of pen testing and a lot of cybersecurity reviews. Do people ever ignore our advice?
Well, they do, as you know, and
It's a bit of a loaded question there.
yes, yeah. Unfortunately, yes. Our advice is often ignored, which is quite strange in many ways when you consider the fact that we're paid to dispense it, and then for it not to be listened to seems like a strange thing to do, but happens an awful lot more than you might think. So, as an example, if I think of probably a really pertinent example, there was an organisation that we did a risk assessment for once. So we basically went in there, we had a look at their systems, a look at their processes, their policies, how they went about things, a lot of what if scenarios, and at the other end of that, discovered quite a few things that weren't right. So we created a report, and we presented the report. We told them, and gave them the documentation, and said, listen, in order of priority, these are the things that you need to do. And there was perhaps a list of, I think maybe 10 things on there that were really needed sorting out, and they didn't do it, any of it, and they got breached, and they got breached due to problems with things at the top of the list. And then they said, oh, okay, right. And I, in fact, I said to the guy, I said, listen, make sure you do this stuff, because I've had many, many experiences where I've given advice about what needs to be fixed and they haven't fixed it. And they've phoned me up and they've said, listen, we've been breached. And then I said, and I've also had many experiences where, I've told people that this happens, and then they've still phoned me back and said, you were right about it, and we have been breached. Anyway, he did phone me back and he said, yes, you were right. You said that this might happen, and it has happened. We didn't do those things, and we have been breached. And I said, okay, great. Not great, but okay, let's put into place the plan to fix everything. It's nothing terrible's happened at this point, so let's put some stuff in place here to prevent further things, from happening. He goes, right, okay. And he says, well, we'll just cover off this top thing that caused the breach. We'll fix that and make sure that doesn't happen again. I says, okay. I says, but what about everything else we told you about? And he said, well, we've been really unlucky, haven't we, to be breached, I think. And he said, so we're just, we're just going to fix this WAD. We've had our breach now. That'll be it. So, we'll just fix this particular one, and the others, we'll get around to it. Well, what can you do? You can lead a horse to water. So anyway, we fixed the main issue, and then a few weeks went by, and kept saying to him, look, you need to do the other stuff. A few weeks went by, and then he got breached again. Separate breach for things a little bit further down on the list. And I think you know where this story's going, right? But eventually it ended up, he got breached a second time. And then he said, look, we've had 2 breaches now. He said, I think we've been incredibly unlucky. And he said, so, we've fixed the problem with those 2 things. So we should be fine now. But there's still everything else. There's like 7 other things we told you to do. And anyway, you know what's coming next. He got breached again. And to the best of my knowledge, we helped him out in that situation. But to the best of my knowledge, I would not be surprised if those other things, those other issues still hadn't been fixed. And I wouldn't be surprised if he got breached a 4th time. My only concern is that at that point, he probably wouldn't have phoned us up, because it just would have been too embarrassing. But yeah, so unfortunately, I mean, amazingly, people ignore our advice, pay the price for it, continue ignoring it, pay the price for it again, continue ignoring it, and pay a price for it a 3rd time. It seems to be a lesson that's very difficult for people to learn. And I don't know, I'm not really sure why that is. It's some kind of stubbornness, or some form of odd cognitive bias, or ostrich effect, of burying your head in the sand. I'm not entirely sure why it is, but it happens too often for it to be anything other than a human trait, a
Mm.
flaw in personality or reason and logic.
I mean, pointing a finger at yourself and identifying your own faults is quite difficult. So I can relate. Um, it may be easier to just ignore the results entirely, and I'm sure we've had a few instances of that you can tell us about.
Well, we've had situations, particularly with penetration tests, where we've gone in and we've done a penetration test and we found, a bunch of things wrong and told them that these things are wrong and have not been taken seriously, even though we've said how serious they are. And then, there's been incidents off the back of that, breaches off the back of that, and probably the maybe the worst of those, I would say, was a large organization that we did a test for, a massive organization, in fact. But we had a look at their systems, and we did this for free because it's an organization that I feel is very important, and we did this for free. And we discovered that SMB version 1 was open and pointing towards the internet. Now, in fairness, this was at a time prior to the Eternal Blue leak that Fancy Bears, when Fancy Bears got hold of the Eternal Blue vulnerabilities from the NSA, it was before all of that. So at the time there was no WannaCry, but we still knew that having SMB open to the internet was a dumb idea, and we made that very clear to this particular organization. And then, several months later, WannaCry hit, and catastrophe struck. I mean, not just that organization, but many organizations with terrible consequences. But I mean, that's just one example of many examples I could give. I mean, that's probably the worst example I can give of when when good advice has been ignored, if you like. But there's I could regale many such tales where we've found issues and companies have either not taken it seriously, not believed us when we've said the consequences of the situation, or they've just been too slow. So we've told them and we said, listen, this is a time game now, really, get it sorted. So sometimes I think what companies do is they have a test and they have a retest maybe 3-4 months later, and they would use the entire 3 or 4 months before they actually implement the change. So their main focus is making sure we pass the test next time, not making sure they're secure in the gap in between the tests, which is obviously a mistake. Again, something we try to raise awareness of, but it isn't always heeded, unfortunately.
I can almost understand it from an end user perspective, um, because when they're engaging with the penetration test, they're just told things that are wrong with their business, their processes, their security, and it can't be a nice thing. So I can understand, but I mean, has anyone ever hidden anything from us to stop us from finding it?
Yes.
Okay.
um,
I should have guessed.
yeah, that they have. But do you know what? Just to take back, just to go back to your original point that um, sometimes we don't just say what's wrong. We do like to say what's right as well, to temper it with what's right. You're right what you're saying, and part of the problem I think is the fact that people don't like to accept bad news. Yes, we're kind of programmed to ignore bad news in many ways, and I think I did a podcast or a piece on this at some point about cognitive biases, where I made the point that during the stock market collapse, studies showed that people stopped checking their portfolios while their shares were going down. And then when things started to recover and, when shares were doing better, the checks that people were making on their portfolios increased. So in other words, people didn't want to look, right, at their shares going down because it upset them. And I do that sometimes with bank statements, right? I don't like to open my bank statements because I don't really want to know what's inside them, right? So it's like it's bad news. I don't want to hear it, and I think as people that we're like that, right? We don't want to hear bad news, so we'll just ignore it. We won't listen to it. We go into denial of it, and I've done that, like I say, with the bank statements before, but at least I'm aware of it, right? And I force myself, like every once a week, to go through that painful process of actually looking at how terrible my finances are. To go back to your question about hiding things, and I think this is a similar thing, isn't it? But it's a bit more sneaky and pointless as well, I have to say. But Yeah, we've had that. We've had it in situations where we've done tests and or penetration tests, and we've then subsequent to that, the company's had a breach for a particular service. Then there's been an occasion where they said, "Well, we had a penetration test, and you guys didn't find this problem." And then we look, and then we sort of do an incident investigation, and we discover what the problem was, how they got breached. And so, well, this service, there's a particular instance I'm thinking of, a particular case I'm thinking of now in my mind, but the breach happened after we tested it, and they said, "Why don't you find this problem?" And it was us that discovered how they got in, and we said because that service didn't exist when we tested, it wasn't turned on. Right? Okay. So then we looked into it, and we actually looked at the logs, and we discovered that the service had actually been turned off immediately prior to us doing the penetration test, and then turned back on again as soon as we'd finished the penetration test. So they must have known there was probably a problem with it and intentionally turned it off so it wouldn't, the results wouldn't show in the test. And then they got breached. That's pretty concerning. I mean, there's, there's another case I can tell you about as well. And again, not mentioning any names, but where we were doing a test in an organization and we found some BitTorrent files. And these BitTorrent files were a concern for us. So we went and told the IT manager and we said, listen, we found these BitTorrent files. And the IT manager was a bit strange in how they reacted to this news. Don't know, couldn't put my finger on it, but it just seemed odd. And then we went back and we continued to monitor the situation. And these files started to decrease in size. We could actually see evidence of the person moving the data, the BitTorrent data out, trying to quickly hide it and all evidence of it. And of course, during the movement of those files, we discovered who it was that was moving them, and it was the same IT manager who we'd told. so 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 these things go on, right? So just because somebody works in IT, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing the right thing, right? Sometimes it's a case of do what I say, not do what I do. So yeah, that was another example where something was being hidden, but there's others as well. We've had situations where I can't even say when, right? Because I don't even want to put it into a time scale because I don't want to give any potential information about who it could be. But we've had situations during penetration tests or incident response actually, where we've gone in to try to work out, why a particular breach has occurred. And we've seen that the logs have been cleared after the breach had happened, which makes our job very, very difficult because we don't have any logs to look at to work out how it occurred in the first place when after being probed. So you might think to yourself, okay, so the bad guys deleted the logs, right, to try and mask what they're doing. But then when we've probed and we've looked, we've discovered actually it's been somebody in authority that's deleted those logs. And when that happens, you become very suspicious. Why would they delete the logs? I'm not saying they had any involvement. I'm just saying that there may be evidence of the fact that they perhaps didn't, they had services open or they were doing certain dangerous practices were taking place, and that gets hidden. They try to brush it under the carpet, which is a crazy thing to do. It's a mad thing to do because it puts you in a situation as somebody who's doing an incident response that you don't have enough information to tell how the breach occurred, and therefore you don't know what activities to put in place to ensure that it won't happen again and to make the system safe. It also doesn't really protect the person that's deleting the logs because you tend to find out that they deleted it and then they've got to answer for why they did that. So another crazy thing that we've come across before is that one.
I mean, it seems to be a lot of burying the head in the sand, a sense of ignorance is bliss. I mean, there's all sorts from, you've just mentioned ignoring advice to hiding things on pen tests, but I'm sure you have some good stories about the use of terrible passwords.
Yeah, I have. Yeah. And I'll come to that. But do you know what? I've just thought of another one with the terrible the hiding of things. I mean, we had a situation where a company didn't like the report that we produced. So we did I won't even mention what the work was. We did a significant piece of work and discovered some issues. Actually, it was post breach. I'll say that much. And we were told that our report wasn't acceptable because it was too damning, and we needed to rewrite it in a way that was less damning and was more would paint them in a better picture, which we didn't do. And we actually lost some money because we wouldn't do it. And they ended up getting somebody else to do it, who probably told them exactly what they wanted to hear. But that doesn't make you secure, right? I think the problem in that particular situation was maybe some legal concerns. That report might end up in the hands of people who could use it against them. But it's madness. It's absolute madness because our top priority is ensuring companies safe and secure. And we don't want to get anybody into any trouble. All we want to do is make sure that it doesn't happen again. Because if it happens again, that's an awful lot worse. Better to learn from the mistake now rather than have it happening multiple times in the future, as we've talked about before. So you mentioned passwords. So passwords are always funny. We've got lots of interesting issues with passwords. So I had an organisation which we were doing some network intrusion detection for once, and I found their private community string in clear text on the network. This was a long time ago, right? I'm in safe territory talking about this now, but it was a huge organisation, absolutely massive one. One that everybody would know of. I found the community string for SNMP floating around on the network, and the community string was NIMDA. And NIMDA, as you probably, if you say that backwards, is admin. So not a particularly inventive password, 5 characters long and admin backwards. And I told them this, and they didn't believe me. And I said, look, I know what the password is. I've seen it. It was in clear text. And having fought with them for a while and them not accepting it, I just said it. I was online to a call with CEOs, and they had global IT outsourcers in, and it all went very quiet after I said that. We've had many cases of that as well. We've had cases where we've done password cracking as part of a penetration test, and we found domain admin passwords that were derivatives of the word admin, with very little difference. And we've approached the CISOs and the heads, and have said, we don't believe you. We don't believe that's a password. And we've on occasions had to actually log in as the domain admin using that password to prove to them that it was set that way. So there's some horrific ones with that, and there's a bunch of other stuff I could talk about with we could do a whole podcast on passwords. I mean, not just incidents that we've seen, but just some of the crazy stuff that's happened, like organizations I've worked at before where this was, pre-Samurai, where I've reset passwords over the phone with no authentication done at all, just by saying who I was. And then during the same call, I've then said, well, hang on a minute. You've just told me that, you've just told me this password, and that you've just reset, and you haven't even taken me through authentication. And they said, oh yeah, good point. Okay, what's your date of birth? That actually happened on a call. I said, what? First of all, date of birth isn't really authentication. And secondly, aren't you supposed to do that before you give me the password? So yeah, it's crazy. And you know what? I mean, you may have seen it as well. Sites you go to log into, and it says, you put your password in, and it says, you won't accept passwords any greater than 12 characters. It's like, why? Because 12 characters is brute forcible, right? It's almost like 13 is almost impossible, but 12 is brute forcible. So then you think to yourself, well, what a strange number to stop at, 12. Right on the limit of what's brute forcible. And then you become suspicious, right?
What I'd like to know, Dave, out of all the experiences you've had, what's the biggest clanger that you've ever come across?
I mean, I'll go through a few. There was a time recently, relatively recently, actually, when I went for an appointment at the hospital, and while I was there, the specialist consultant said I just need to go and confer with some colleagues, and walked out the room, and left his PC on, logged into the database with all the patient information, and his login ID card still in the machine with everything up and working. So I could have just gone in and looked at anybody's records. I think that was pretty crazy. Probably the worst one is again another enormous organization which has to remain nameless, I'm afraid, where we did a very light touch test. And what light touch tests are is where we have permission to have a look and see whether a particular web application in this case is secure, but we can't be intrusive. We can't put the web app in any kind of risk of it breaking. And we did this very light touch on a web app which contains oh just so much sensitive, confidential, private, personal information about many of us actually. And this test enabled us to see everybody's records and conversations that they were having as well. Um, and I can't give you any information about who it was or what it was about, but I can say that this would horrify you if you knew. And lies were told as well on that particular one. So when this came to a head, and we had discussions with, so it was a company, and they were employing a software company, and the software company provided a service, a software product to them, which they were then using, and the software product was insecure. And when we brought this to light and said what was possible, we were told, "Oh, no, you didn't see live data. What you saw was test data. All of that's test data." Like, so, we just did a double check on a few of the records, and when you create test data, you don't create elaborate storytelling like we read in there. There were clearly genuine information that was in that data, and some of the people involved, we actually did a little bit of research, found them on Facebook, found out where they live, found out some details about them, and it was the same, right? So it was live data, and we were being lied to that it was test data. And even the organization that employed this software company defended the software company, or this particular individual defended the software company. And you think, well, why would they do that? And then, when you think about it for a while, you think, well, they're covering their own ass. If they actually said it's okay, yes, we'll use your software, and then that software is shown to be bad, it puts them in a bad light, right? So, if you think cover-ups aren't going on, they're going on all the time in so many organizations where the truth is being manipulated to try and save people's ass. And it's the wrong thing to do because it puts everybody at risk. But when we look at why these happen, I did the bit on cognitive biases, and I think that might be worth revisiting at some point. But I think a lot of it is to do with the box ticking culture that cybersecurity has got itself into, where it's more important to tick all the boxes and get the certification and put it on your website and gloat about it than it is to actually be secure and to protect the data of the people that you're working with and looking after. And we see that all the time, and I'm not, if you look at many of the standards, they're great if they're actually done right. You look at ISO 27001, brilliant to have if you do it properly. It's subjective. It all depends who audits it and who puts those processes into place and whether they're telling the flipping truth as well. Because you can lie, can't you, for an ISO 27001 audit? You could lie on Cyber Essentials. You could lie on Cyber Essentials Plus, and people do, right? Because the overwhelming for many organizations, the key thing is to get some documentation to say they're compliant rather than them actually being secure. And that's why I think there's a lot of ass covering when things go wrong, because people have lied or fibbed or manipulated the truth just to get the documentation. And then when something goes wrong, they have to cover their ass quick. So I think that's a big part of the problem, and choice supportive bias as well. So if something bad happens, nobody wants to admit the fact that they've made a mistake. So they'll research and do all the work they can to say, "No, it was a great decision that I made, even though we got breached 3 times," because they don't want to accept they did something wrong. It's a painful thing to accept that something went wrong, but it's also a beautiful thing to learn by your mistakes, so that you put measures in place to make you better and stronger. And the ostrich effect as well. Of course, people just bury their head in the sands and pretend that we're making it all up. All these cybersecurity experts talking nonsense and making it all up, because why wouldn't they? Of course they do. They want to make money selling their products. It ain't like that.
What's one of the funny stories that you've got to finish this episode off?
There was a situation once where we were told that a company told us they were unhackable. Said, you will not hack our organization. There's no way we can be hacked. We are indestructible. And of course, that was like a red rag to a bull for us. And we said, no, that's nonsense. And they said, well, look, I tell you what, we'll bet you it wasn't a UK company, so I won't say what it was. We'll bet you 50, whatever it was, is that that you can't breach our organisation. We did some work with Ryan Ackroyd at the time, actually, from Lulsec. He was sort of like, pitching in with us a bit back then. And yeah, he came up with some pretty inventive ideas about how we could go about this. Ryan, if you're listening, it'd be good to hear from you, mate. We couldn't hack them by any of the conventional means. So we had a letter, by the way, from them to say that we had permission to do this, right? Just to be clear. And in the end, so we reached a point where we thought maybe they're right, maybe they're not hackable, right? So then we switched it up and moved to social engineering and ended up creating email accounts that looked identical to their, or at least very similar to their email accounts. And we ended up sending out we got them in the end, did a bunch of social engineering and phishing stuff, and in the end got them with a social engineering effort, which was a employee satisfaction report, right? Everybody wants to grumble about their bosses, don't they? So that went out, and we had a little script running so that if anybody actually replied to this phishing email, that our mobile phones would receive a text message, and then would have to, times of the essence, sleep on it straight away. And it was probably about 7 o'clock in the evening, I think, and I suddenly got a text message. I wrote the script, by the way. I was quite pleased with it, and text message went off, and we all ran to our computers and leapt on it, hive mentality, and discovered I was a lucky one, right? Because we all broke the accounts up, because a few fell for it, and we all broke the accounts up and looked at different ones. And I guess I was lucky, and the account I was looking at was an architect, and all their intellectual property for particular drawings for particular systems, and I can't say what they were sat there in his inbox. Just loads of intellectual property, pages and pages of the crown jewels was in his inbox, including an email to certain customers telling them what passwords are to log on to certain systems as well, to enable them to look at other intellectual property, which I then went and had a look at as well. So we ended up, when we met with the client next, with just like reams of documentation of stuff that we found. So yeah, we won the bet. But he also said for that, right? So here's what I can remember saying to him. He said, "Look, I'm not for $50, right? It's a very cheap way to get a pen test, isn't it? Doing a bet like that." He goes, no, because we'll also we'll give you an open checkbook for our cybersecurity as well. And checkbook never really opened, to be honest. Opened a little bit, but never. It certainly wasn't an open checkbook. So I think we were, a little bit disappointed about that one. So there's that story. But I guess a good one to finish on maybe was was the time that we got locked in an office. That was interesting. This was like in the sort of the earlier days of Samurai, where we did it. And I won't embarrass him by saying who it was, but we're doing a pen test for a very well known seller of automobiles, and so we've been testing all day, and the test. So it got to about like maybe 5:30, and we were just sort of finishing off the test, and all of a sudden we realized the light outside the room that we were testing from, because they'd put us in a room like you do, when you do a pen test, you normally get boxed into a room, you crack on, don't you? And the room that we were put into, we suddenly noticed that outside the window that sort of faced the main building had gone dark. I thought, oh. And then I sort of looked out, and there was nobody in the room. Right, the floor where people were sat like half an hour ago, nobody was there, and it was dark. And I looked across, and I could see the alarm light flashing, and I realised we'd been locked in. So we were locked in post pen test, and I was making calls, and I was phoning the boss, and I was saying, "Listen, somebody, I couldn't get hold of anyone." And we sat there for about 30-40 minutes, an hour, and then not knowing what to do, we had a look outside. Is there any way we could scale down from the window, but we're on the second floor? So and it got a bit, and it started to get a bit Lord of the Flies. Do you know what I mean? It was like we were going a bit stir crazy, not knowing what to do. And in the end we thought, you know what, we just have to make a break for it, right? Because we couldn't get hold of anybody, and we thought, and we looked through the window, and we were trying to work out how we could escape, if you like, and we saw the fire exit, and we thought, okay, well, the fire exits, they've got to open outwards, right? Always, regardless of what situation you're in. So we thought we surely we can get out by the fire exits. So we made a run for it. Of course, the alarm went off, and then another alarm went off when we opened the fire exit door, and the whole thing was beeping away. And we stood in the car park, and we said, shall we just make a break for it, right? Shall we just jump in the cars and drive off? And And then, like, because the police are going to come and everyone's going to come and it's going to get sorted. So, and the place is secure. Nothing's been stolen because it's ours. But we couldn't get out because there was barriers on the car park, metal gates. So we couldn't get. So we just stood in the car park next to a car. So we just had to wait for the rescue team to turn up. And then I tell you, when the alarms went off, that's when the phone rang and we spoke to the manager. And then, like, he says, "Oh, look, I'll come in and let you in," and talk to the police, let them know they don't have to come. And in the end, we got out of there about 2 hours after we'd finished testing, like about 7:30, something like that. We had a couple of hours locked in that room, hungry as well. We thought, I wonder if we could. We were talking about, can we get pizza delivered, and then maybe lower something down from the window so we could get the pizzas back up. It was mad.
Oh dear.
So yeah, there you go. That's maybe a bit more lighthearted note to finish on.
Yeah. Well, I think on that note, we'll call it there. Thanks for your time, Dave. It's a pleasure listening to you talk about this.
No worries. All right.
Until
Next time. Cheers.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
This podcast was brought to you by Samurai Digital Security, purveyors of cybersecurity solutions. Find us at samuraisecurity.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. Samurai Security, tearing cybersecurity a new arse since 2015.